This is Gemara Zevachim, Daf Lamid Gimel, and we're holding on Lamid Beis and Mid Beis. So the truth is, we went almost all the way to the end of the Amid, 8 lines at the bottom, but we sort of had to fly through the end. So we're going to go back up. We're going to go back up, and we're going to be discussing a kasha on ulas. It's a little bit of a, we'll call it a lengthier sugya, but the truth is, let's even go higher up. Amar Ula, Amar Reish Lakish, we're just going to speak out the memra, which is about 10 lines from the top. Those who are looking at your screens, you'll see that we're going to highlight the memra right now in blue. The first word on the line is Lefnei Hashem, Amar Ula, Amar Reish Lakish. We like all the learning to be an incredible schos, a refuah shlema for Gabriel Simcha, ben Miriam Ahuva, b'seich sha'ar, chayli Yisrael. So Ula, in the name of Reish Lakish, says, Tamei shechlis yadei lefnim like. If someone who is Tamei sticks his hand inside the chatzar, he gets malchus. Why? Because he's makish biyah l'negiah, and says Ula, just like negiah b'mixas shema negiah, so to biyah b'mixas is shema biyah. That was the memra. So we're in the middle of a lengthy kasha of Eisei Rav Hoshia le'ula. Middle of the kasha, we got slightly sidetracked in discussing Shitas Rav Yochanan. And now we continue. We're about 20 lines to the bottom, the line after the word harbe in parentheses. First word line is va'amru. Says the Gemara, ve'i amre bia b'mixas shema bia. Like we just saw again, Shitas Ula, that what? Bia b'mixas negiah b'mixas shanagiah, bia b'mixas shema bia. That entering in a little bit is considered as if it's a full entry. Asks the Gemara, Heichi mayel yadei b'bahines. If that is true, then how did the Brisa by Toma, the Brisa by Tvul Yom, allowed the Mitzayra to put in his bahines, his thumb, in to get to the sprinkling? Says the Gemara, once to get the asham and the oil, the dam of the asham and the oil, says the Gemara, once you have a bia bimixas, even one little bit, even one little thumb's length, that should be considered as if his whole body, and therefore it's as if he's going in bitama. Aidi v'aidi asay sheyish by karis. Both of them are an asay sheyish by karis, to bring the carbon pesach and to stay out of the chotzer when you are tummy, are both mitzvahs asay that have the punishment of karis. And therefore, if, like Ula said, bia b'mixas ishma bia, if sticking your thumb in is like your body walked in, then how is this Tvul Yom allowed to do so? He's going to miss out on the carbon pesach. Okay. They're both asay sheish by karisu. So why does one win out over the other? Kasha on Ula. Amar le mi tunach. Ula says back from your tuna, from your bundle. From your bundle, I'll answer your kasha. What's the teretz? Shiny mitzayra. Why? Hayol v'hota l'tzarat, hayota l'keriyov. Mitzayra is different. Why is mitzayra different? Because the way the mitzayra in a case of his own tahira, what is the whole process? The process is that even though he currently has saras and he's tamei and he's becoming tahar, what's the din? The din is he got to stick his thumb in. So therefore, when we're makel in that case, so too we're going to be makel in a case where he has Thomas Keri in order to allow him to be part of the Karban Pesach. Amar Rav Yosef, Kosavar Ula Ruban Zavim V'Nasim Tmeiyamis. Based on that which we just said, Shitas Ula, Ruban Zavim. If most of Klal Yisrael are Tumas Zav and Erev Pesach, V'Nasa Tmeiyamis, and then after being Tumas Zav they become Tmeiyamis, what should the halacha bring? They should be able to bring their Karban Pesach. Why? Because again, so since the Tumas Meis would be lifted to allow them to bring the Karban Pesach when Roiv of Klal Yisrael is Tamei, so we should do the same thing for the Tumas Ziva. Amarle Abaye mi dami Tama Ishtari Ziva la Ishtari. Says Abaye, you can't ask such a kasha. Because the whole dispensation that Ula said is only when Tuma. But other types of Tumais, meaning Tuma afterwards, you are Tummy Mace, and now you're becoming Tuma Ziva, Ula would never say such a din, and therefore Ula would not allow those that are Tummy Ziva to have the Karban Pesach brought for them. Amrlei. So says the Gemara, 1 second. Til Mahachi Kamar Mahar. Maybe this was Rav Yosef's kasha. Rav Yosef's asking a kasha on Ula. Ula deflected the kasha saying, what sheikh is? I'm talking about one tumah, you asked me about 2 tumas. Says the Gemara, maybe this was what Rav Yosef meant to ask. Ruban Tamei Mace. V'naseu Zav. If Roiver Tamei Mace, and then they become Zavim. Since we're Mako for their Tamur, Mako for the Ziva, Amar Le Rav Yosef responds, yes, indeed, that was what I meant to ask. Amar Le, says Rav Yosef, this case is comparable to Ula's case. Why? Because the first Tama is going to be lifted for Tamei Mace, and therefore says Rav Yosef, we shall lift it for Tama Ziva as well. Responds Abaye, Vakati loidami, says Abaye, no. Mitzaira etiru, says Abaye, I'll explain to you. When it comes to Mitzaira, when he has to put his behindas, he has to put his thumb in on the 8th day, Hitiru, that exact action we were makel on, Hayal Vishtari. So therefore, once we're makel, we're going to be makel even for Tomas Kari. Tomya dechuyo. But in the case of Toma, it's not the same. In the case of Toma, Toma is just dachli when Roiv of Klal Yisrael is Tamei. And therefore, lahayitzchi la layitzchi. They're not makel for this type of Toma. We're not makel for Toma Ziva. We're only makel for Tamei Mace. So Amrle Rava responds, Adarabba. Ibcha Mistavra, says Rava, no. I'll tell you the opposite. Mitzaira Hitiru. In the case of Mitzaira, it's a heter. We allow him to put his hand in. La Ishtari, for this we're makel la Ishtari. We're only makel, meaning it's a specific dispensation that the Torah allows for a Mitzaira to stick his behinas in to be makel on his saras. But we're not makel when there's a matter of Thomas Kari. Whereas in our case of Toma dechuyu, mali chad dechuyu, mali shtei dechuyos, says Gvar mamish fakert. Maybe when it comes to Toma, we have more of a svara to be makel because there's no specific heter for this exact action. No, it's a heter for Toma hotra b'tzibur. So once there's a dechuya, once we're pushing off Toma, says the Gemara, l'chayra, what's the difference? We push it off for one. What's the difference? We push it off for a different one. Says the Gemara, Mechlal de Tarvayu Svirulahu. What do we see from here? That Tarvayu, both Abaye and Rava seemingly are in agreement that Tama dechuya betzibur, that when it comes to the famous Claire, the famous Shayla that we've had so many times, how do we view it? When Gans Klal Yisrael is Tameh, and we allow them to bring a carbon. What's the reason? Is it dachui that we just push it away, or is it a heter that it's a full-fledged allowance? So it sounds like from the aforementioned discussion, says the Gemara, that both Abaya and Rava are going to hold its nidch, and the Tab Rashi spells out Keloimar. Bechushi nidches etzla dichui ba'alma. It's just pushing it away. Nisias avoin shatzitz meratzev loy beheter gamor. It's not pshat, it's mutter. It's pshat. We allow to push it away to do this action. The Tumas means it's chivaloi. The Tumas ziva, and therefore it's only going to be for one, and not for Tumas ziva. Says the Gemara, that really was a lengthy addendum, but that really was the end of yesterday's shir. That was the end of the kasha on Ula, of Ula suggesting that Bia b'mixas Shema Bia. And we had a kasha with all its answers. Now, says the Gemara, Lema, Misayeya Le. Let's bring a raya to Ula. A raya that Bia b'mixas is indeed Shema Bia. Kol ha-smichais shahayu sham. All smichais, all acts of leaning that were performed in the chutzner, kaira aleihen ani tekef l'smicha shchita. We say about them that the shchita, the slaughtering of the carbon, tekef, must be right after the smicha, right after you lean on the animal. Chotz mizu, except for one case, the case of the mitzaira is asham. Sha'isa b'shar nikanar. The reason being, because where is it done in shar nikanar? She'ein mitzaira yachal ikanes l'sham. Why? Because the mitzaira is not able to go into there through the shar, through the gate. Ad shemazmin mazin alav midam chatasai. Till we sprinkle upon him the blood of his chatas, midam hashamai. So says the Gemara. So now here we have a raya. If you say not like Ula, if you say going in a little bit is not called fully entering into the Beis Hamikdash, then I don't understand. So we have an issue that we need the smicha next to the shechita. Givaldik, put your hands in, be a b'mixas, not your whole body, even though the mitzvah is tamei right now, and do what? To do smicha. The fact that we don't do that, and the fact that we say that this is the one case that we don't have teikef l'smicha shchita, we don't have a fulfillment, says Rashi, 4 lines into the narrow lines falls out of the pasuk of a samach v'shachat. What must the reason be? Because bia b'mixas is indeed shema bia, and that's why we can't do that. Amar Rav Yosef, 10 lines down, the first line is Yosef says, Rav Yosef no raya. Hamani, who shitas is brayser Rav Yosef Rav Yehudi. Tamar merchak safain. Rav Yehuda holds that the place of the shchita of the asham is safain, and it is mirachek. It's far from the shar nikanar, and because the place of the shchita is far from shar nikanar, there's no way to stick your hands in. The whole chat that we just said would have only been if you're allowed to do the shchita right next door to the shar. So stick your hands in. But according to Rav Yehuda, it's not possible. Why? Because the place of shechita is further away. Therefore, there's no raya. Says more. 1 second. Why don't they make a small door where you have to do the shechita of the asham and allow the mitzaira to put his hand through the door and do this smicha? Says Abaye v'Rava, no. Everything, it says the Torah, a pasuk in Divrei Hayamim, Hakol b'chsam yad Hashem, alai hiskel es kol malachos hatavnis. Everything in the Beis Hamikdash is scripted by God, and you're not allowed to add anything on your own, and therefore maybe you'd be right, make a pishpeish katan, but that's not a possibility. Ikad Yamri, a second lashon Damri, anyone who does smicha has to do roishay v'ruba. You can't just do smicha with your yadayim, with your hands. Has to be your head and the majority of the body. My time, you need to have your full resting on it, and that's a reason why it's not possible to do smicha, because sticking your hands in won't allow for a kol koichi. Says the Gemara. So that's the raya to Ula. Continues the Gemara based on that which we just quoted. Micah suffer. What do we hold? A clear about smicha. Ika suffer smichas asham mitzayra de'araisa. Is this din of smicha? The din of smicha by the carbon asham of the mitzayra, is it a din de'araisa? And the take of the smicha shchita de'araisa. Then le'av l'ismaich. Then I don't understand. Let him come in. V'le'ismaich le'edya. Why? D'rachman amar. If it's a din de'araisa, then why does it have to do with being in the shar nikanar? Who cares? that you can have an issue of taking smicha l'shchita l'maisa, it's a din daraisa. You're right. Theoretically, we would allow you. But because every psia, every step into the chutzir has a potential karisos, because the maisa, the guy is tamei, therefore we don't allow this daraisa to override, because we're worried that it might come to a matziv that on your way out you might take an extra step. Take of the smicha lav daraisa. Now, the Gemara flips it according to Ika Amri, and according to Ika Amri, the Gemara is saying that the din of Teikev is not a daraisa. Now, Meisvei, but the Torah, as we quoted earlier, v'samach v'shachat, ma'asmicha b'Torah navshchita b'Torin. V'amr lav daraisa. If you're going to tell me it's not a din daraisa, but tamei nami mishkachaslu, then it should even be b'tamei. Ela epoch says Gemara, switch it around. Smicha zashem b'Torah lav daraisa. Take of smicha l'shchita is going to be, yes, a din da'araisa. We turn over to Lamed Gimel Lamed Beis. Says the Gemara, continuing discussing, Shitas Ula, which we started with today. We started with Ula holding Bia b'mixas, Shema Bia. We segued from the Kasha on Ula to Araya to the Shita of Ula Klape Bia b'mixas. And now says the Gemara, another way to answer up the original Kasha that we started with. Ravina Amar Le'inyin Malchus Itmar. Ravina says that when Rish Lakish was saying his din was, look at the top Rashi. Hada Amar Ulalel Mishmei de Rish Lakish. The original memra that we started with, which was what? Bia b'mixas Shema Bia. Says the Gemara was not about Kares. It was about Malchus. Says Rashi, Kedamar loike behedia. Avaloylinin kares to Isay Mitzayra. What was the whole kasha that we asked? We started with a kasha from a Mitzayra Shira, carried the Chizkish Biel in a Gia, Lazaris Kish, Zevlo Savay, Avaloinish, Laiskish, Inash Benagia. And the whole kasha was predicated on the din of kares. Says Ravina, you missed the boat. Ula's whole din was only with regard to Malchus. Kiyasa Ravin Amar Ravavu Olinin Toma Shenagea Bekoidesh Itmar. No, who was Shlakish's din Abia B'mixas was with regard to the din of a Toma, but not like Ula extended the din of Toma to din of Bia B'mixas. Says Rav and Amar Avua, that was an inaccurate extension. The Itmar Tamish and Agea Bekoidesh Rishlakish Amar Loike Rav Yechon Amar Eino Loike Rishlakish Amar Loike, again a case of a Tamei Shenaga Bekoidesh. So why does Rishlakish says his Malchus? Because says the Torah B'chol Kodesh Leisiga Rechram Eino Loike, because I hope it's Shuma Ksev, that's only a din by Shuma. For Rishlakish Haikra Lachi Udasa Hamibayle Lazara Laichal Basar Kodesh. Says Rish Lakish, no, this pasuk is not needed for this din, but rather it's needed for a different din. It's needed to teach us a azhara, a warning for someone who is tamei, who eats bisar kodesh. Deitmar azhara loichal bisar kodesh minayin Rish Lakish amar, from this pasuk chol kodesh loy siga. Rav Yechanan Amar. So how does Rav Yechanan respond? Says Rav Yechanan, Tini Bardzala learned in a brayso, Asya Tomasai Mibias Mikdash. We learned Tomasai from the Dinabia B'Mikdash Malahala Oynesh Isir Avkan Oynesh Ve Isir. So the Gemara is concluding that according to Reish Lakish, the pasuk B'Chol Chodesh Leisiga is azhara against one eating kachim while he is tamei, and therefore says the Gemara, this has nothing to do with touching kachim while you're tamei. It's only din eating. Tamei shenaga bekodesh, responds the Gemara, mida'avki rachmana b'lashin negia. Therefore, azhara loichel, it's going to be an extra azhara for eating him mid'iskish kodesh le mikdash. And that really concludes the third way of learning the whole sugya of Ula Amar Reish Lakish, whether it was a din about Malchus, and how we learned that the original Mekar says, Ravin Amar Avu, that the original Mekar had nothing to do with our discussion, was a completely different discussion. Says the Gemara, let's dive a dot deeper into Shitas Reish Lakish. With a raya, 5 lines to the bottom, Tanya Kavasi de Reish Lakish. Is a warning for one who eats kachim while he is tamei. As we just said, for the fact that the Torah continues talking about going into the mikdash, we have a hekesh that what? Ma mikdash is davar sheyesh by netilas neshama. Just like going into the mikdash, the punishment at hand is something with netilas neshama, as the Tab Rashi points out, which is what? Which of course is kares. Av kodesh davar sheyesh by netilas neshama. And if we're talking about touching, kachim all your tamei netilas neshama miika. Ella be'achila, rather, it must be talking about achila, like Reish Lakish just said. When we stop over here, we'll continue discussing Shitas Reish Lakish the next year. Psiyata Dishmaya.